I'm really excited to be teaching this week's Parashat Yitro because this is a very special parsha for me. And I want to begin by giving a very brief summary of the parsha. And then we're going to take today's class in a slightly different direction. For those of you who've learned with me before, you know that I often do a close reading of text. We're not going to be doing that so much today. Instead, we're going to be focusing on, to me, one of the most important theological questions in Judaism. And it arises directly from this week's parsha. So our summary, we're in Parashat Yitro. Of course, we've just experienced the miracle of the splitting of the sea of reeds. We've experienced the giving of the manna and Shabbat. And now we've also had this situation with the Amalekites. That was last week's parsha. So now we're moving into this week's parsha where we have a story of Moshe's father-in-law, Yitro, who is the high priest of the Midianites. And he's really pretty impressed with Moshe, and he's heard about this miracle, but he notices that Moshe is overburdened and he's just burned out. I mean, how many of us can relate to this idea of being completely burned out? And he suggests a delegation of labor and a certain hierarchy or system of judges, which is a really beautiful part of the parsha that I encourage folks to dig into. And then we move into one of the most central events in Jewish collective understanding, which was, of course, the receiving of Torah at Mount Sinai. And a lot of people ask, well, what was actually given at Sinai? Was it the 10 Commandments? Was it the Aleph and Anochi, the beginning of the 10 Commandments? Was it the full Torah? Was it the oral Torah? Was it the whole thing? What was given at Sinai? For me personally, in my own theology, I am much more interested in what the experience of Sinai was than what was actually, was it the entire Torah? Was it the 10 Commandments? Because I deeply believe that revelation happened there and that revelation happened in a variety of ways for everyone present. And this is something that we experience or observe not only this week in shul or wherever we're reading the parsha, but also, of course, this is the central element of Shavuot. And that leads me to what I want to really address today, which is that a couple of years ago, back in 2017, I had the momentous honor of delivering an Eli talk. And Eli talks back then, unfortunately, I don't believe that there are any being produced today. I hope that it will start up again. But Eli talks were the Jewish version of a TED Talk. And the Eli talk that I gave was called We All Were at Sinai, the Transformative Power of Inclusive Torah. The central question that I wanted to ask in that talk was, who was at Sinai? And what actually is revelation? How does that work? And how does that transpire? In the context of that talk, I specifically talked about disability inclusion as understood as being part of revelation. So to put that another way, we often think of inclusion of Jews on the margins in Jewish community as we are including those who might feel like they are strangers in the community. And I was curious and still want to investigate the question of if we turn that completely on its head and say, no one is a stranger in the Jewish community. We are all part of this whole because we all stood or we all were at Sinai together. We all received the Torah collectively. And we learn in the very famous Midrash. And now, Mara, I'm going to invite you to put some sources on the screen if folks want to look at these sources. We all learn in a very famous Midrash that every Jew, past, present, future, who would ever exist, was at Sinai to receive Torah. And simultaneously to that, Torah has 70 faces. So what does that mean? 70 is a rabbinic number used to talk about infinity. 70 means infinity, meaning that as many Jews as there were at Sinai, and as many Jews as there would be across time and space at Sinai, so too was revelation received by every single person, both collectively, so we all were there for the momentous revelation, and individually. We all received it in a way that we could understand. We have the very famous phrase from this week's parasha, Na'asa v'nishma, we will do, and then we will understand, which is a really interesting thing because we find out very quickly that the people are like, wait, what did I sign on to? But for the purposes of understanding what revelation is, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then we will hear. So the revelation was given to each of us, particularly. We all have our halak in Torah, our part of Torah, our particular connection to Torah. We all might experience, no matter who we are, what our relationship is with Jewish tradition, there are pieces of it that resonate with us more than others, right? That's the notion of, there are pieces of it that really connect to us. We're all part of this larger whole. I'm giving you my theology. I do not expect anyone here to subscribe to it. I am simply outlining my own perspective, that we all were part of this collective religious experience. And we all received that collective religious experience through the prism of our own understanding. And that doesn't mean that it's a free-for-all and everything goes and there's no boundaries. What it means is that that collectivity was translated in a way that each of us could understand and could really resonate with our own soul curriculum. So that gets us back again to the question of who was at Sinai? What does it actually mean to be at Sinai together? And for this, I am very indebted, and I apologize, these are not on the source sheet because in the original talk, I was focusing on disability inclusion, but I want to branch this out to talk about lots of ways in which the central story of our parasha, the revelation of Torah at Sinai, can feel deeply exclusionary. Many folks in the Jewish feminist community have noted the lack of women overtly mentioned. There's a beautiful, beautiful poem called We All Stood Together by Merle Feld. If anyone can have access to it, please feel free to put it into the chat. We're not going to read it together today, but it is an absolutely gorgeous poem. And it is Merle Feld's imagining what might it have been like for women at Sinai. We also, of course, have Judith Plaskow Standing Again at Sinai, which was published in 1990. It's a classic of Jewish feminist work and the Jewish feminist, contemporary feminist world. Now, when I say contemporary feminist world, let me be very clear that there are lots of feminisms and there are lots of entry points. So Judith Plaskow is one theologian among many. She is one theologian. There are lots of others, Rachel Adler, Blue Greenberg, Tamar Ross, et cetera, all of whom have different understandings of this central question. But it is such a central question because ultimately what we're asking is, if we theologically understand, and theologically is a little bit of a complicated word, but if we understand ourselves in the Jewish imagination and when I say imagination, that is not to imply it did not happen, actually quite the contrary. If our self-understanding is that revelation at Sinai was the most momentous, perhaps after the splitting of the sea, religious event that we experienced. And we all were there to receive revelation. And it was this incredible sensory event. And as the Torah outlines, and I invite you to read on your own time, Exodus 19 and 20, as the Torah outlines the process of the people preparing and all of the choreography around the revelation and what might it have felt like or been like to hear God's voice, to hear everything happening, to see the things happening, to feel, to just have that multi-sensory experience. Who was there? Who was there in that experience? And so that the reason that is such a key question is because it really filters down to our experience of thinking about whose voices do we heed when we learn Torah? Whose voices do we heed when we think about what is legitimate or what is within our own boundaries of Torah? That is a very live question today. This is not simply an intellectual question I'm asking. I am inviting us to think about what does that actually mean, to think about revelation and who was there and who was not. And it allows us to clarify for ourselves that if we believe that we all were at Sinai to receive Torah, and that Torah was given over with 70 faces, meaning 70 interpretations of revelation, then it stands to reason that we're all part of that chain of tradition. And there is a rabbinic idea that the further we are from Sinai, that the less kedusha, the less holiness we have, we aren't close to it, we aren't close to that revelation. So our Torah kind of goes down in value, because we can't be a gadol, we can't be a great. That is a particular way of thinking that I do not resonate with. I think that there are gedolim in every generation. And I believe that if we all were at Sinai together to receive Torah, that receiving of revelation is something that we carry with us, regardless of how we come to be part of the Jewish people. And that's the piece that I think is so important. Because again, and I feel like I'm repeating this a bunch, but it's so important. If we all were at Sinai, according to the Midrashic tradition, and received Torah together, every single Jewish soul that would ever be in the world, then that includes all of those who chose Judaism, all of those who, we could put it another way, came home to Judaism, cast their lots with the Jewish people, those who were born Jewish, and those who became Jews by choice or came home to Judaism, or whatever term we want to use to describe the beautiful process that many go through to embrace their Judaism. So I think that that's key, because it allows us to then ask the question intellectually of ourselves, what Torah do I want to learn, and from whom? And it's not only a question of personal hashkafa and personal outlook, or I don't agree with this person religiously, so their Torah has nothing to teach me, right? And how often do we do that? How often do we say, well, this person's idea or this person's understanding of Judaism is totally outside of the bounds of my own understanding, and I don't agree with them, and whatever it is, we might say, whomever we are, I think we all find ourselves making those boundaries. And depending on who we are and how we are positioned, those choices can have tremendous effect on our fellow Jews. So we then have to go even deeper and ask ourselves the question, why? What about this Torah do I not connect with? And this is not to say that we have to connect with all of the Torah that we learn, actually quite the contrary, right? Part of what it means to receive 70 faces of Torah is that inevitably, we are going to experience Torah that we don't connect with. And Torah, which comes from the Hebrew word for instruction or teaching, is really all about that. The Torah is expansive, and Torah is embracing of all aspects of our human lives. There is a difference, and this is what I'm really interested in thinking through today, and I think that it connects very much to the Parsha. There is a difference, though, between thinking about what is the Torah that I deeply do not resonate with and feel like is outside of the bounds. And we all have those choices, and especially in the world we're living in today. And we're not this is a place for thinking about this question theologically. We're not going to be having a debate politically in this space, but of course, many of us are probably thinking about the political realities we find ourselves in today. Who do we think of as our teacher? Why and how did we get there? And this is something that I think quite a bit about in terms of my own teachers of Torah. When I am seeking a teacher of Torah, as it says in Pirkei Avot, make for yourself a rabbi or a teacher, I'm always wanting to know what their lineage is. And what do I mean by what their lineage is? I want to know who their teachers were and where they learned. Because that tells me a lot. It doesn't tell me everything, because every person is different and every person is an individual. But it tells me something about their background. It tells me something about their hashkafa. It tells me their religious outlook. It tells me something about what their priorities are. So I will do the same thing here. I am Rabbi Lauren Tuchman. I was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in 2018. The Jewish Theological Seminary is the flagship institution of the conservative movement. So I am a part of that movement. I am very much influenced by the Torah of JTS. And I am also very much influenced by the Torah of many of my teachers, Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum, to be one of them, someone who I have deep admiration for, Rabbi Chassier Oriel Steinbauer, Rabbi David Jaffe, to name a few, and there are many others that will be coming to me as we continue. I am very committed to holding my own particular hashgacha while also reaching out to the broader Jewish community. I am very inspired by Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. I am very inspired by Rabbi Sam Feinsmith. I am very inspired by Rabbi Dorothy Richmond. And my Torah manifests in lots of different ways, including through the beautiful Torah of Sfara. Thank you to Rabbi B'nai Lappi, and to the beautiful Torah of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. Thank you to Rabbi Jonathan Slater, and to Rabbi Sam Feinsmith, and to Rabbi Dorothy Richmond, and to Or Halev, to Rabbi James Jacobson Mazels, etc., etc. And all of that is part of the revelation of Torah as it manifests in all of these different Jewish avenues. We are so lucky to be living in a Jewish world that is rich with beautiful teachers who have so many different styles of teaching, whether it's those who are teaching Hasidut, whether it is those in the Reform community, whether it is those in open Orthodoxy, traditional egalitarianism, Reconstructionist, renewal, Musar, all of the things that we could keep on going and going and going. All of those have something to teach. All of those have something to teach. And we also are deeply aware that as we learn from all, as my teacher, Rabbi Hasier Earl Steinbauer, always reminds us, when we are learning Torah from someone who we're really struggling to connect with, who we don't have the same background, we don't have the same frame of reference, but we must ask ourselves the question, is there something I can learn here? And that may not be something positive, actually. The question always is there something I can learn here? It might be that this is the Torah that I do not want propagated into the world. Because as we learn, I believe it's from the Ramban, who teaches about Torah, that it is possible to be someone who is a terrible person and live within the bounds of halakha. Meaning that revelation is not enough, right? We receive revelation in a way that we understand it, but then we get to, together, or even inwardly, figure out what that actually means. What is the kind of Torah that we want to be teaching? What is the revelation of Torah that we want to live out in the world? Is it a Torah of love and a Torah all of whose paths are paths of pleasantness and all of whose ways are ways of peace, as we know from the book of Proverbs, and also as we say in our liturgy, whenever we put the Torah back in the ark? Is it a Torah of really deep radical inclusion, even when that feels uncomfortable? Or is it a Torah that is really steeped in our own shadow? We know that every great tradition has its shadow side, but we have the opportunity, I believe, today, and
I'm really happy.
I'm going to ask folks to mute, please, if they are not. Thank you. We have the opportunity today, and we have, I believe, the obligation today to live in the world according to a Torah Chesed and a Torah Emet and a Torah Chaim, a Torah of truth and of righteousness and of justice. And we do that through how we act in the world and our own ways of living Torah. Because Torah isn't only the thing that is in the books that we read or in the sacred scroll. Torah is, or is meant to be, as I understand it, part and parcel of every moment of our lives. How are we showing up? How are we living our best and most authentic selves? So that again, and I know this has been a bit of a wandering presentation, but that gets us again back to the question of, why does this revelation at Sinai matter? And I think it matters for a variety of reasons. The first is that it is a national experience. And when I say national, I am thinking of Yisrael as Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, all together receiving Torah collectively. And it matters on a personal level because we all have our own portion in Torah. As I had said with the 70 faces of Torah, that we all have our portion in Torah. And it matters because though our people, as we see in this week's Parsha, though our people get to a point where they can't really handle the divine voice that's so overpowering, and they ask Moshe to please, will you please just go up on the mountain and hear it for us? And we know how that ends in a few parshiot, where Moshe goes up on the mountain and they don't know when he's coming back, and then they build the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf. But our people get to the point where where it's hard, it's too hard to hear. But the key is that was not the initial experience. The initial experience was that the mountain was smoking. We were all surrounding the mountain to receive revelation of Torah. It was not something that was given to one person. It was something that was given to the collective. And that, I think, is the most powerful moment of revelation, which is actually something that we don't only reenact tomorrow, for those of us who will be in synagogue to hear the 10 Commandments. It's also something that we actually reenact every single time we have a Torah service, because every single time we have a Torah service, we have a choreography of receiving revelation. And I believe it's the Piazetzna Rabbi, who is a very famous Rebbe from the 20th century who perished in Auschwitz in, I believe, 1942, or 1943, that we have the ability to receive Torah anew every single day. If we think about the Torah study blessings that some of us may make in the morning, that is, again, connecting us to the ability to receive Torah. And this all feels really abstract. So I want to take a couple of minutes to bring it down a little bit to the concrete, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. So it's really beautiful to think, oh, this is wonderful. We receive Torah every day. We have this new opportunity every day. But how is someone to connect to that for whom Torah is not a daily part of their life, right? How do we all connect to this rich heritage if it's not a part of everyday life? And that's true for many Jews, and that's true for many of us in lots of different ways. But we are all still connected to Torah, regardless of how often we learn. I mean, the fact that you are right now all in this room learning Torah together, that is a beautiful act of kavanah and of kava, of intentionality and of fixed practice. Because Judaism is a tradition that really values fixed practice. Right? We are a tradition that ultimately, at the end of the day, this week is a very unique week. We don't have the mountaintop experience every week. We have it this week, and we have it this week for a particular reason, because it is this peak spiritual experience. But we know that this is not how life actually is most of the time. Just as we have the holiness of Shabbat every week, but we have them the 6 days of creation every week as well, because most of our lives are lived in the mundane world. Most of our lives are lived as people doing the best we can to live the best lives that we can. So how does Torah speak to that? And I think that this is where thinking about living Torah in a deep way is so important. It's not only about finite Torah study. It's really about, as we learn in the 10 Commandments, how do we treat the people around us, the interpersonal commandments? How do we interact with other human beings? Do we value every person we encounter? We live in a world now where that is far from the reality for most people. Most people really don't live in a way that values the divine spark in every human being. But how do we get back to that? That's a core teaching in Torah, as core as the revelation. And so I think that is ultimately our question of why does revelation matter and who was there? Because that ultimately is going to affect how we live our lives and how we relate to the people around us, as much as how we relate to Torah. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if every single one of us was there to receive Torah, then every single one of us has a responsibility to carry forward a positive and life-giving Torah. And certainly, we know that this world is far from perfection. And what we do every day, I believe, is try to do our small piece to try to build a better world, even if it is a small piece, even if, as the Hasidic tradition tells us, that our moments of redemption are small. That is still an important thing. And I'm going to pause us there, and I would really love to spend the last couple of minutes talking with all of you about all of this. And I know I've given over quite a bit today, so this will be recorded. Feel free to go back to it at any time. But as I said, I think this is one of the most important areas for our own spiritual and our own spiritual and religious growth these days. So thank you so much. I'm now going to pass it over to Mara.
Thank you, Rabbi. In the chat, we have a lot of people who are thinking about what inclusion means and finding a lot of meaning in this framing of that we were all at Sinai. And I think there's also quite a few people who are inspired by your listing of your teachers, and we have a lot of people who have shared their teachers, including there's been a few call outs to the women's commentary of the Tanakh, of the Torah. And so I think on that note, we are going to ask some questions. And I see, Nina, that you have your hand raised. So if you can ask a short question, that'd be great.
Sure. I'll try to make it. Sorry, I'll turn on my video. I'll try to make it as short as possible. Rabbi Tuchman, I just want to say you touched so many nerves for me. I'm the mother of a disabled child who's autistic. And I actually gave a talk on this question of sort of who sees him and how does he matter and why does he matter? And where I landed ultimately was on this notion of brokenness. And he's not capable of taking on the commandments affirmatively because of his intellectual disability and so on. So where does that situate him? And I wound up situating him in this notion of brokenness and how we all complete each other. So what you're saying resonates very deeply. I'd also throw out two other things as quickly as I can. One is that sometimes I think the intellectualism of Judaism is deeply off-putting and sort of it makes Judaism inaccessible for many of us, certainly not just my son, but for myself. I also think a lot about a Heschel quote that I'm paraphrasing, which was, when I was younger, I admired people who were clever. As I grew older, I admired people who were kind. And I think that prism has been a really important one for me to think about. So I think we often do a poor job of including people. We use the words of inclusion. We don't engage in the acts of inclusion. And I will say just lastly that one of the only places I found true spiritual sort of godliness was when I take my son to Shirenu services, which are hosted by a local rabbi in Manhattan Synagogue, where it's a welcoming place for people with disabilities. And it's probably the only place I've ever thought God actually might exist. So I'll stop there.
I want to just take a moment to take that in, because I think that is such an important and powerful thing that you said, Nina, and I want to respond to you directly before I take on any other questions. So there's so much in what you said. I wish if we had several hours, I would just respond to the whole thing, but I want to address two things in particular, which are the last two things that you said. The first, that I heard, and there was so much there, but one of the things that I heard was the intellectualization of Judaism has done a tremendous disservice, not only to people with intellectual disabilities, but really to many of us. And the second being that the only place that you really felt that God existed was when you would go to Shirenu, which prioritizes the accessibility for people with all kinds of disabilities. And I want to pause there, and this directs back immediately. And for those who don't know, and I don't know how, I know many of you have learned with me before, I'm the first blind woman in the world to enter the rabbinate. So disability issues are very personal to me. And I think that these issues that you have raised really get to exactly the fundamental of who are we as a people. And we could have a much longer conversation, and this is something that I talk a lot about. I am very passionate about Jewish mindfulness practice because I think that we have over-intellectualized our tradition. And I think that there are lots of reasons historically and from intergenerational trauma that has become that way. But I do believe for so many of us, it's safer to be in our heads than in our bodies, right? And when we valorize and when we value the intellect, and I am guilty of this myself. I mean, certainly the way I've been speaking the last, half hour, right? Um, the more we valorize our intellect, the less we recognize that that is not the means of access for lots of people. And in terms of thinking about mitzvot and taking on mitzvot, this is a key thing because it gets back to Revelation. If I believe that every single Jewish neshama was at Sinai to receive revelation, then to be intellectually and spiritually honest, I have to hold that that applies to every single Jewish neshama, regardless of ability status, and regardless of whether or not one is able to, quote, take on the mitzvot as the rabbis understand it. Because the idea of taking on the mitzvot is an evolution from Torah. The Torah doesn't talk about mitzvot in the way that the rabbis do. That is a way for the rabbis to have carried forward our tradition once we lost the Second Temple, right? But maybe we don't take on the mitzvot in a rabbinic way. But that does not mean that we did not receive Torah. Those are different, in my mind, those are not necessarily dependent upon one another, right? I think that you have to have received Torah to take on mitzvot, but I don't believe that you have to, I don't think that, except, let me say that again. Every single one of us received revelation. We're all part of that experience. We all carry a piece of that within us, regardless of our ability to complete or to perform mitzvot for any number of reasons. And that gets into a much deeper conversation around obligation, which we're going to set aside for today, because that is a later theological and conceptual understanding that was brought forward by the rabbis. And we are all rabbinic Jews now, kind of by dint of how history turned out. But I think that it is key to remember that every neshama was there. And if we really believed that every neshama was there, our Jewish community would look very differently. So that's why we have to ask ourselves the question. And for those of us who love the intellectualization of Judaism, we have to really grapple with the ways in which that has had a very deleterious effect on lots and lots of people. And thank goodness we are living in a world today where the flourishing of Jewish spirituality is unparalleled. I mean, I am grateful to be part of that, where folks are dafka saying, my teacher, Rabbi Jonathan Slater, especially, and please keep on putting your teachers into the chat. I would love to hear more of them. I think it's so important to lift up people's names. Talks a lot about how we have to get out of our heads. And with that, I'm going to pause. And I want to invite more questions and comments.
Thank you, Rabbi. We have a lot of people who are just sharing thanks for both Nina's comment and your reply. And I see we have one more hand raised, or two more hand raised. We'll go to Tanya and then Joel.
And I'll take them both back to back.
Great.
Okay, Rabbi Tuchman, it's great to see you today. I think one of the things that we often forget with the Sinai experience, that all human beings are created in the image of God. And we have our ideas, our human ideas, and we build our fences around God. But I believe that our fences, God is not limited by the boundaries we build around him about who can access and who can experience God, because I think God is beyond our human capabilities of understanding, and people that we deem that may not be able to do the mitzvot or able to read Torah, God can still relate to him because of his limitlessness and his ability to go beyond human limitations.
And then
Thanks, Tanya.
Joel, and I'll take both of them.
Joel, you should be able to unmute yourself. Great.
Thank you, Rabbi. This was a great lesson. If we were all at Sinai, all the people received revelations, then why are we in different Jewish movements? Why aren't we all Jews? Why aren't we all praying to God the same way? We all received the revelations together. It was the same revelation. We're
Yeah.
all looking at the same Torah. We're not looking at different books.
No, we're not. And I think that, Joel, your question relates directly to Tanya's point, right? Is that we as human beings, we all received Torah together. We all received Torah both together and in ways that we individually could understand. And then we do what we humans do all the time, right? Which is that we build our own fences. We build our own fences around our own communities because we want to keep some Torah in and not allow other Torah in. Or we want to put those people over there. Those people are, outside the camp. They're not part of our community. And whether it's in terms of ability status, which that's a huge one. That was the focus of my Eli talk. Whether it's anything else, because we humans, right? We tend to go with our own self-interested, our own finite perception. When, as Tanya, as you noted, God is infinite. Right, we're the ones who are finite. As someone used to say, we keep appointment books because we human beings only have finite time, but you never have to make an appointment with God because God is infinite. God is all over the place. God is everywhere and beyond everything. And we as human beings, that's why this is so aspirational, because we have to remember that, because we often put ourselves in our little silos. And the Jewish community, like all other communities, but specifically in this context, the Jewish community, we're really, really good, as you said, Joel, about doing that. Why are we in our own little communities doing our own thing when we all receive the same thing? Because we human beings are really, really good at the us and them, and we are really, really bad at remembering that actually we are all part of one larger community. So I'm going to leave it there because I really want to have some time for more responses, but thank you. Do we have any more comments in the chat?
We have Sarah Blumberg who has your hand raised.
Hi, Rabbi Lauren. I just wanted to say, that I think, as our fellow Christians, read our Torah, read what they call, the Old Testament, just the same as we do, that we all in that, society can very much benefit from this teaching, and that, perhaps if more people would sort of take this to heart, then less ableism and other, such behaviors would maybe be less towards especially blind people. I deal with it every day with my boyfriend, who's a blind person, and other of my Federation friends and people with disabilities in general. So this is a great teaching, and I certainly resonates with me as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that a lot. Absolutely. And that's why, again, we've got to get out of our heads and really into our souls and into our hearts. So thank you for that, Sarah. Last couple of minutes together, I would love to hear, actually, before we close, do we have any other comments in the chat? Because if we don't, I'd actually love to close by hearing from folks who would like to answer this question, which is, who are some of your most significant teachers, whether of Torah or in general? And if you have one that you want to share a little bit about, I know that folks have put names in the chat, but I would love to hear also from folks directly if there's any particular teacher of Torah or in general that really has influenced how you understand the tradition.
We have some more hands raised.
Wonderful. Let's take those comments.
Great. Thank you so much, Nina. I just wanted to give a few extra seconds to see if we can hear from someone we haven't heard from yet. Thank you. Here, Cantor Neil.
Okay. Put that on so you can see me. In that list that I put in of my teachers, the very first one was Cantor Max Wolberg, who actually was instrumental in founding the Cantors Institute at JTS and the Cantors Assembly. And the single thing that he drummed into our heads the most often and with the most sincere enthusiasm is the concept that the whole point of Nusachat Tefillah is to paint the meaning of the words, to paint their emotions, to do it by using the chant of the liturgy to show the meaning of the Hebrew especially that's, back when he was talking about this, there were more people still alive in the Jewish community who had a clue what the Hebrew was talking about. Nowadays, it's getting more and more rare. So it's the job of us as Chazanim and anyone else who leads services to A, understand what it is you're saying, B, understand how to use nusach, and C, how to put in proper accents and proper phrasing to paint the meanings of those words. I'll let it rest at that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's writing into the comments. I will say, Cantor Neil Schwartz, someone has listed you as their teacher, so that's lovely. I'm also seeing Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, Rabbi Manish Friedman, Rabbi Batshevet Appel. We are very blessed to have wonderful, wonderful teachers in our tradition, and I hope we can all count Rabbi Lauren Tuchman as a teacher as well. Rabbi, is there a closing thought that you'd like to leave us with?
I just want to leave us all with a bracha that as we enter the Shabbat of Revelation, that we really do take all of this to heart, that it doesn't remain only in the seichel, only in the intellect, but it actually filters down, and it's not an overnight transformation. I think it's going to take generations, but I believe that we each can do our part every day to really transform this world into one that is a true dwelling place with the Shekhinah. So thank you all for the divine presence. So thank you all for having me today, and I look forward to learning with you again in the future.
Thank you all so much, and apologies that we couldn't hear from everyone. I'm wishing you all a very, very Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful Shabbat. Bye-bye.